A new homeowner received a certified letter. The HOA wasn't just demanding $88,000 for back dues, they were publicly humiliating him. They posted notices on neighborhood bulletin boards. They sent letters to his neighbors describing him as a delinquent and a problem resident. They called a community meeting specifically to embarrass him. The homeowner's name was Robert, and he was about to do something nobody expected. What happened at that community meeting would leave the HOA president shaking with rage and the entire neighborhood
questioning everything they'd believed about their leadership.
Robert didn't just fight back. He dismantled the entire fraudulent system in front of 200 people. Robert Harrison was a 52-year-old retired military officer. He'd spent 30 years in the Army, risen to the rank of colonel, and had learned to recognize organizational dysfunction and corruption. He also had a strong sense of justice and fairness. When he saw wrong, he couldn't ignore it. Robert had purchased a beautiful home in Oakwood Estates, a prestigious neighborhood in suburban Virginia. The realtor mentioned the HOA, saying it was very professional and well managed. Robert didn't question it. He was excited about his new home and didn't think much about the HOA at the time. 2 weeks after closing, Robert received the letter demanding $88,000 in back dues. Robert immediately recognized several problems. First, the previous owner had owned the house for 18 years. If there were truly unpaid HOA dues going back 8 years, which was what the HOA claimed, why had the previous owner never been sued? Why had no lien been placed on the property? Why was this suddenly Robert's problem now? Second, Robert contacted the HOA and asked for documentation of these alleged unpaid fees. The HOA president, a woman named Victoria Stewart, was defensive and unhelpful. She claimed the records were complicated and refused to provide itemized statements showing what Robert supposedly owed. Robert was suspicious. He'd seen organizational malfeasance before, and the warning signs were there. But then Victoria made a critical mistake. She decided to escalate the humiliation campaign. Victoria scheduled a community HOA meeting and specifically put on the agenda, discussion of delinquent homeowner, Robert Harrison, property 247 Maple Street. She sent letters to all neighborhood residents highlighting Robert's failure to pay obligations. She even included his photo with the letter, identifying him publicly as a problem. The strategy was psychological intimidation. Victoria believed that social pressure and public shame would force Robert to pay rather than face neighborhood judgment. She had no idea who she was messing with. Robert received the notice about the meeting. He read it carefully and recognized it as a deliberate humiliation campaign. He also recognized it as potentially illegal. In many states, publicly identifying someone as a delinquent without due process violates privacy laws and fair lending practices. Robert decided to attend the meeting, and he prepared carefully. Robert spent the week before the meeting researching Virginia HOA law. He obtained copies of the official HOA bylaws. He requested, through certified mail, all financial documentation for his property. He researched Victoria Stewart's background and found concerning patterns. He discovered that Victoria had been HOA president for 5 years. During that time, the HOA's yearly budget had increased by 40%, but visible improvements to the community had decreased. Maintenance was being deferred. The common areas looked neglected. Where was all the money going? Robert hired a forensic accountant to examine the HOA's public financial records. The accountant found massive red flags, payments to vendors that couldn't be verified, invoices lacking documentation, and suspicious transfers of money. Robert also reached out to other residents. He invited them to coffee. What he heard shocked him. Multiple homeowners reported receiving similar demand letters for back dues that they didn't owe. Some had paid because they were intimidated. Others had threatened with legal action and given in. One elderly woman named Margaret had paid $34,000 in fraudulent HOA charges over the years because she was frightened. Another family had paid $16,000. A young couple had been forced to refinance their home to pay fraudulent charges. The victims numbered at least 15 families. Robert realized this wasn't just about him. This was systematic fraud affecting an entire community. He reached out to a real estate attorney, a woman named Sharon Chen, who specialized in HOA disputes. Sharon reviewed everything Robert had gathered and told him something important. "Robert, what you found is evidence of massive fraud. The HOA likely has no legal basis for these charges. The public humiliation campaign is likely defamation and violates fair lending practices. But more importantly, if we handle this correctly, we can expose the entire fraud and protect all the victims." Sharon advised Robert to do something bold. "Come to the meeting. Don't hide. Face your accusers directly, and then we're going to dismantle their entire case in front of everyone." The night of the meeting arrived. The community center was packed. Almost 200 residents attended. The atmosphere felt like a public trial, with Robert as the accused. Victoria Stewart opened the meeting with her prepared speech. She described Robert as a problem resident who was refusing to pay his obligations and was dragging down our community. She painted a picture of Robert as irresponsible and defiant. Many residents nodded. They'd heard the letter. They believed the narrative Victoria had created. Then Victoria called Robert to stand up so the entire room could see the delinquent homeowner. Robert stood calmly. "Before I respond," Robert said clearly, "I want everyone in this room to understand something. What you're about to see is evidence of systematic fraud by our HOA leadership. I'm not going to humiliate you. I'm not going to yell or get angry. I'm going to show you documents and facts, and I'm going to ask hard questions that demand answers." Robert had prepared a detailed presentation. He connected his laptop to the community center's projector. "First," Robert began, "let me show you what the HOA claims I owe, $88,000 in back dues. But here's what's interesting. The HOA has never provided me with itemized documentation showing exactly what I supposedly owe. Victoria, can you explain why?" Victoria's face flushed. "The records are complicated." "Actually," Robert interrupted, showing a document on screen, "I have here my certified request for these records from 1 week ago. You're required by Virginia law to provide itemized statements within 10 business days. You haven't done that. Why?" Robert continued. "Second, I want to show everyone the official HOA bylaws. These are the rules that govern our community. According to these bylaws, any new fees or special assessments must be approved by a vote of the membership. Can anyone show me where the membership voted on the charges allegedly owed by previous owners?" Nobody could. Victoria looked increasingly uncomfortable. "What that means," Robert explained, "is that the HOA has been charging fees that were never legally approved. That's fraud." Robert then displayed the forensic accountant's findings. He showed payments to vendors that couldn't be verified. He showed invoices with missing documentation. He showed that the HOA's expenses had skyrocketed while community maintenance had decreased. "I had an accountant analyze our HOA's financial records," Robert said. "What he found suggests possible embezzlement. Money is being paid to vendors that may not exist, or vendors connected to HOA leadership." Victoria stood up. "This is outrageous." "You're making accusations without—" "I'm making documented observations," Robert said firmly. "I'm asking questions, and I'm calling for a full independent audit of HOA finances by an outside firm." Robert then showed the camera footage from the community center's security system, footage Victoria didn't know existed. On screen, residents saw Victoria, months earlier, in a meeting with a man who ran a landscaping company. She handed him an envelope. The envelope was passed back and forth 3 times. The landscaping company's name appeared on HOA invoices for work that residents testified was never done. "That's Victoria Stewart handing cash to a contractor," Robert narrated. "And that contractor's company has received over $200,000 in HOA payments over the past 3 years." The room erupted. People were standing up, talking, looking shocked. Robert continued. "I've also discovered that the back dues demanded from multiple homeowners are based on fees that were never properly voted on. Multiple residents have been defrauded. That elderly woman there," he pointed to Margaret, "paid $34,000 that she legally didn't owe." Margaret started crying. Other residents nodded. Several voices confirmed they'd received similar fraudulent charges. "Here's what I'm proposing," Robert said. "First, Victoria Stewart should resign immediately. Second, the HOA board should hire an independent forensic accountant to audit all finances for the past 10 years. Third, every resident who was charged fraudulent fees should receive a full refund. Fourth, we should immediately notify law enforcement. The room erupted in applause. Even residents who didn't know Robert before stood and clapped. Victoria's face went completely white. She realized her fraud had been exposed. She grabbed her documents and walked out of the meeting. 3 days later, the HOA board, realizing they couldn't cover up the fraud, asked Victoria to resign. She did, but not before transferring money out of HOA accounts. The board immediately hired an independent forensic accountant. The full investigation revealed that Victoria had embezzled over $400,000 from the HOA over 5 years. She'd created fake vendors, inflated invoices, and pocketed the difference. The board contacted law enforcement. Victoria was arrested and charged with embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. The investigation also revealed that Victoria had been systematically using the HOA's power to attack homeowners who questioned her. She'd created fake back dues charges specifically for residents who questioned her authority. It was a deliberate strategy to silence whistleblowers. Robert's attorney filed a class action lawsuit on behalf of all homeowners who'd been fraudulently charged. The settlement amount was massive, over $600,000 in restitution to residents. Margaret received a refund of $34,000. The young couple received their $16,000 back. All victims were made whole. Robert's $88,000 demand was completely dismissed. Not only did he not owe anything, he received a $2,000 refund for the brief period he'd lived in the community before the fraud was exposed. The neighborhood was transformed. New HOA leadership took over, implemented complete financial transparency, and made quarterly reports to residents. Special assessments required member votes. All vendors had to go through competitive bidding, and no HOA officer could make unilateral financial decisions. Robert was elected to the HOA board. He implemented safeguards to prevent future fraud. He created a resident advisory committee. He established whistleblower protections so residents could report concerns without fear of retaliation. The local news picked up the story. Retired military officer exposes massive HOA fraud, protects hundreds of residents. Robert was interviewed on multiple news programs. He became a national figure in HOA reform. Victoria was convicted and sentenced to 4 years in prison. She was also ordered to pay restitution exceeding $600,000, though given her limited personal assets, this was largely symbolic. Other HOA communities across the nation, inspired by Robert's actions, began demanding their own independent audits. Several other corrupt HOA leaders were exposed and prosecuted. The state of Virginia passed new legislation based on Robert's case, the Homeowner Protection Act, which established stronger financial transparency requirements, member voting rights, and whistleblower protections for HOAs. Robert's presentation was studied in business ethics classes and law schools as an example of how to stand against corruption. His willingness to prepare thoroughly, to gather evidence, and to stand up at a public meeting inspired other residents to demand accountability from their own HOAs. "Victoria wanted to humiliate me," Robert said in an interview 2 years later. "She thought public shame would force me to pay fraudulent charges, but she didn't account for one thing. I'm not someone who backs down when I'm right. I served in the military for 30 years. I've faced harder challenges than a corrupt HOA president." He continued, "What matters is that justice was served. The victims were made whole, the fraud was exposed, and systemic safeguards were put in place to prevent this from happening again. That's what matters." The profound lesson transcends this single community. Corruption thrives when there's no accountability, and when victims are isolated and intimidated. But when one person is brave enough to stand up, gather evidence, and confront corruption publicly, it creates a domino effect. Robert didn't just fight for himself. He fought for an entire community. He showed that ordinary people, armed with facts and determination, can overcome institutional corruption. Victoria thought her position gave her power. She discovered too late that truth and evidence are more powerful than any position. When someone tries to humiliate you for standing up for what's right, Stand up louder, document everything, gather evidence, and confront the corruption in front of witnesses. That's how real change happens. This story reveals a transformative truth. Bullies and corrupt leaders rely on victims being isolated, afraid, and unprepared. But when someone faces them directly with evidence and truth, in front of an audience, the entire power dynamic shifts. Robert's military training taught him that preparation and direct action defeat corruption. Have you ever witnessed someone stand up against corruption and expose it? Have you ever seen an entire organization transform because one person had the courage to fight back? Like this video and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories about standing up to corruption, exposing fraud, and ordinary people taking down corrupt organizations. Hit that notification bell right now so you never miss our latest uploads. Comment below. Tell us about a time when you stood up against an unjust organization or person, or when you witnessed someone else do it and win. Share your story in the comments. Your experience could inspire thousands of people to stand up against corruption in their own lives. Thanks for watching. Robert's story reminds us that corruption loses when it faces truth, evidence, and brave people willing to confront it publicly. If you're facing an unfair HOA, a corrupt organization, or any kind of institutional abuse, don't suffer in silence. Gather your evidence, build your case, and stand up in front of witnesses. One person with facts and courage can change an entire community. See you in the next video where we'll share another incredible story about standing up to corruption and winning.